Good afternoon, everyone. Delighted that you can join us today. Welcome to a preview, a curtain raiser, if you like, for our UK-EU Fund Forum and Think Tank, tracking changes in the relationship between UK managers and the EU fund industry post-Brexit. UK asset managers have been key to the development of the EU fund industry. More than 175 UK managers have funds domiciled in Ireland. UK is the 5th largest market for Luxembourg funds, and approximately 80% of Europe's alternative managers are based in the UK. But Brexit has challenged the long-standing fund industry relationship between the UK and the EU. Change is coming, and given the likely changes to EU distribution rules, there will be a lot to talk about. So in anticipation of these changes, we are launching the UK-EU Fund Forum and Think Tank. This will be a combination of research, news, and an interactive monthly forum for UK managers and the European fund industry. I'm Karina Vaughan, CEO of Catalina Consulting. Our work is in FinTech, RegTech, and ESG, connecting tech entrepreneurs to the fund industry. And we're delighted to partner with IFI Global for this new series. During today's short session, if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, please don't wait until the end, and we will try to get to as many of your questions as we can. I'm now going to hand you over to Simon Osborne, CEO of IFI Global, and I'll join you again at the end of the session for questions. Simon, over to you.
Thank you very much, Karina, and delighted you could join us today. I'm pleased to see that we have people from a number of different countries following this, and a good representation of UK fund managers as well. I think many of you do know us, but for those of you that don't, IFI Global is a research and media house based in the City of London. The tracker, which has been following regulatory change in the EU ever since AIFMD was first mooted as a possibility. That is one of our 3 monthly publications, and that's where the focus of today's discussion is going to be, in the tracker area of our business. And today what I'm going to do is outline where we are and what the EU UK Fund Forum and Think Tank are going to be all about. So this is a preview of what I'm going to say. I think the third item on this slide is the most important one, and potentially the most scary one. We'll come to that in a few minutes, but let's do the bits that we know about first. And I thought, even before that, before we get into what happens in the rest of this year, it would be useful to do a reminder to everyone of the timeline of how we got to where we are. And this is really an excuse for me to put up what I think is really underestimated by virtually everybody: the importance of how AIFMD is one of the major contributors to the reason we have Brexit at all. And what do I mean by that, you may ask? Well, Michel Barnier was responsible for AIFMD, at least the early iterations of it, because he was EU Commissioner for the Internal Market and Services at the time. It caused shock and anger in London when it was first mooted. There was very little consultation before it was the first drafts of it were published. And as well as all the usual suspects, Michael Hinzeys of this world at CQS, Chris Benodis, etc., a number of people you wouldn't expect to be in that camp got very angry indeed, including Helena Morrissey. I remember a quote from her at the time saying, "Enough is enough, it's time for us to get out." And Eddie Weimerkirch, who was head of the entity that predated ESMA. ESMA started also in 2011, called the early drafts of AIFMD unworkable. I think the reason I say AIFMD was so important is because a lot of people in the city and West End hedge fund managers and private equity managers went to Cameron, who was Prime Minister at the time of the coalition government, and said, if you promise a referendum in your next manifesto, we will substantially increase our contributions to the Tory party. Cameron took the money. He probably didn't expect to win the election. I'm sure he expected to be back in power with the Liberal Democrats after the next election. Well, we all know what happened, and as they say, the rest is history. So I'm going to move on to the penultimate item on this slide, no agreement on equivalence. A very exasperated Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, said to the House of Commons, quote, he'd given up, unquote, on getting an agreement on financial services with the EU. And he said in that same statement in the House of Commons, where others might wish to use equivalence as a political weapon, that will not be our approach. The UK since then has granted equivalence to EU financial services firms in 28 areas. The EU, by contrast, has done it in just 2 areas, and even that might be curtailed. Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, is very worried about what's happening in derivatives clearing at the moment. And he says that what he understands the EU is planning to do is, quote, very controversial, and the UK might have to sue the EU to protect its euro clearing market. Meanwhile, Michel Barnier has accused UK firms of setting up letterbox entities in the EU versus financial services firms, and said that the EU will not grant equivalence until it approves on where the UK is going to diverge from the EU rulebook. So here are the known unknowns of 2021. I'm going to come, as I say, to this is, if you think this is bad, wait until you see the unknown unknowns in a minute. The known unknowns, that quote, the reason I got aim in inverted commas is that is a comment from the EU Commissioner for Financial Services, Mairead McGuinness. She says she thinks the EU and the UK will aim to have a financial services agreement in place by the end of this month, but she also said at the same time that does not necessarily mean equivalence, and that will all depend upon what the UK's intentions are. I mean, I think, by the way, it's worth noting in passing, if you don't already know this, you can curtail equivalence agreements at 28 days notice. So I don't understand all this business about why you have to understand what the UK's intentions are. If the UK does diverge to a greater extent than was expected, then you simply curtail the agreement. A lot of people here in the UK think this is entirely political and nothing but political, and it's getting a number of people very frustrated. This summer, the EU brings in its first directive on distribution. I'll come back and say something about that in a second. Many of you will know last week, I think it was on the 10th of March, the SFDR really formally came into play. The tough stuff doesn't really begin until next year. But what perhaps many of you won't know is really incredibly all-encompassing, the SFDR. It's the most extraordinary measure. I spent some time over the weekend trying to read it. It's unbelievably complex and complicated. It affects everything, pension funds, insurance sector, as well as the fund management sector. Whereas we in the UK are going to have something much more limited. It's going to come in later, with the acronym, the TCFD. And it concentrates entirely on environmental green issues. It doesn't have the social stuff that's in the SFDR. This is a huge, I think this is going to be another area of controversy between the EU and the UK that we'll see in the coming years. AIFMD2, the consultation ended at the end of January. It is expected to come out this autumn. That could change, but that's what most people expect. We'll see what's in there. A lot of people don't expect that much change. It's worth making the point, though, in passing, that the whole point of AIFMD, going back to my original point about Michel Barnier, it was invented as a means to control the wilder excesses of Anglo-Saxon capitalism. And that hasn't worked out particularly well, since the wilder excesses of Anglo-Saxon capitalism are all now outside the EU. So one wonders what's going to happen to the directive. I suspect it will get wound up and merged with UCITS, but that's a conversation for another day. We have these 2 directives, I think, coming in June, the IFR and the IFD, where that's all about harmonization of EU investment firms. And of course, we in the UK won't be part of that. Portfolio management delegation, at the minimum, we're going to get more ESMA approval of that. I'll come on and say something about that in a second. So these are these things that we know about. What do they mean? I think it means in distribution terms that the days are going to be over very soon of when a UK fund management group might have had a Manco in Ireland or in Luxembourg, but from London, from their head office in London or from the head office in Edinburgh, wherever it may be, they shoot off and do the distribution or get involved in the marketing of the funds in continental Europe from the UK. That, I think, is about to come to an end very, very, very soon indeed. I think that will have to be done from somewhere in the EU. I've already mentioned a couple of times portfolio management delegation. I'm not going to get into that in any detail today. I've discussed it quite a lot in some recent e-events we've done, but I think it's very likely, it's not confirmed, but it's very likely that at least for European funds, portfolio management delegation from funds domiciled again in Dublin and Luxembourg and elsewhere back to the UK will be curtailed. And eventually the EU, I'm sure, would like to go further. We in London manage money for something in the region of 1.9 trillion euros of European investors' money. The EU would like to have more control over that than it currently has, and that's why it's very much looking to build up financial centres in continental Europe. I think it's beyond any doubt whatsoever, we'll see further substance requirements in Ireland and Luxembourg. I've already referred to the very recent comment by Barnier claiming that what some UK managers are doing in places like Ireland and Luxembourg is setting up letterbox entities. If you read what was in the CBI review of CP86 last autumn, you would be surprised to hear him saying that, because there's huge amounts of substance already required to be in somewhere like Ireland, and that's only going to get greater in the future. What I think is going to happen is we're going to see in Ireland and Luxembourg the Mancos, which are going to become ever more important than they already are, whether they're third-party Manco hosting platforms or whether they're standalone Mancos. They're going to be really key to the whole industry of Europe, and they will take on, in my expectation, responsibility for distribution and probably for portfolio management in the same way as they currently do at the moment for risk. They'll be responsible to the regulators, therefore, for portfolio management and distribution as they are currently for risk. And the bottom item on this slide, ESMA very likely will be becoming more involved, really at the behest of the AMF in France in oversight of what the AMF, Robert Ophel, who's the chairman of the AMF, has called more than once, incidentally, the quote, export centres, unquote, of Dublin or Ireland and Luxembourg. He doesn't think, and he said this, as I say, more than once, that the CSSF or the CBI has enough resources to do the job of supervising what goes on in Ireland and Luxembourg properly, and he thinks ESMA should get more involved in that. So that's all stuff we know about, and that's all going to be happening. Now I'm going to get on to the fun and perhaps one might call it the more scary stuff. What I've called here the unknown unknown. Some of this is better known than others, but I think you can probably place it all in the unknown unknown category. Let's draw breath. What are we really talking about here? I think we're talking about potentially really significant, beyond what is on the agenda for 2021, regulatory divergence. And what could that mean? It could mean two competing models in the European region of how financial services should be regulated as kind of rivals. And that, I think, is hugely significant and probably not really foreseen as we went through the Brexit phony war period from 2016 till the end of last year. Now we're into probably the real war, and things are going to probably diverge more than most people would have ever imagined. Which brings me on to the political fallout. How far might that go? Well, let me just give you what's happened just in the last week. Just in the last week, we've had the European Council President, Charles Michel, accusing the UK of imposing what he called an outright ban on the export of COVID vaccines, comments which he was asked to withdraw by the UK, and he has refused to do. Then the Irish Foreign Minister, Simon Coveney, in a sense backed that up by accusing the UK of, quote, perverse nationalism, unquote, in trying to get a trade deal with the US ahead of the EU. And then at the end of last week, we heard that the EU is going to be suing the UK over its unilateral decision to extend the GB Northern Ireland temporary trading arrangement. Meanwhile, on the other side of the channel, David Frost, the UK's chief Brexit negotiator, now just brought back to negotiate everything with the EU, has accused the EU of ill will and said some other things too. And Andrew Bailey, who's the governor of the Bank of England, ex of the FCA, as you doubtless all know, has made several very provocative anti-EU comments as well. So that's just 1 week. Who knows what next week or the week after will bring? But I think it's just worth citing just 1 week's sort of 1 week's in the politics of the EU-UK, which brings me on to the third point on this slide. For the first time in 200 years, Europe now has competing economic and political models in the way that it currently has. It has had it before, but it's now got back to where we were during the Napoleonic era, when Napoleon's continental system was very much a prototype of the EU. That ended up, as you doubtless all know, with the continental blockade of what was called England at the time, and of course war. And interestingly enough, that war ended in a suburb of Brussels at a place called Waterloo. Now, I'm not saying for a second that's what's going to happen this time, but I do think, and I do think it's very possible things could get worse, potentially even quite a lot worse, before they get better. And this will have huge implications. I really mean huge implications for the fund industry. And I don't think, maybe because of lockdowns, we're not able to run around the city having the normal chats and drinks and coffees as we normally would. I don't think enough people are aware of this in the way that perhaps in the city or in London, or indeed in Dublin and Luxembourg, that they should. There is a lot of political posturing going on, perhaps on both sides of the channel. It's very bad news for the fund industry. I'd love to be proved wrong on this. We'll see what happens. Just some examples of unknown unknowns. In fact, if anything, the Cayman business could be more of a known unknown. Cayman was blacklisted by the EU for most of last year, from February until October last year. The EU Parliament voted very heavily in favour of blacklisting it again in January this year. That's not their decision, it goes to the Council, but it's looking quite likely Cayman will get blacklisted again this year. And it's also possible, I think it's no more than just possible, I don't think it's likely, that other offshore jurisdictions could end up getting blacklisted by the EU as well. I mean, it's worth making the point in passing that the EU is the most powerful trade bloc in the world, and it appears they really do want to project that power, including, unfortunately, for political purposes too. And that's really going to, the ramifications of that are going to be felt by the UK in several different ways, way beyond financial services, but often probably in the offshore jurisdictions too. As I've already half mentioned, I think it's likely that we will see a really big push from the EU to develop its own global capital market centre and investment management centre. It must be galling for the EU that they have this 450 million population entity, but they don't have a major global capital market and investment management centre within it. And that is a big Achilles heel for them, and something they would like to do something about. Otherwise, they're going to be dependent upon Anglo-Saxon capitalism for their financing needs, which none of them want. So here, what we are doing, as Karina mentioned, with this series, perhaps before we get into the series, for our subscribers, we're about to go, and there are some people following this are subscribers. You'll be hearing from one of our researchers, Olga Palat. She'll be in touch shortly regarding getting views on a questionnaire that we're going to be putting to the industry on what concerns them in this. It's going to be focused upon UK managers. So the first question is, are you concerned about the changing EU-UK relationship? and if so, what particularly concerns you? And then we're going to ask, might one or more of the following change your EU plans: distribution, portfolio management delegation, the substance issues in Ireland and Luxembourg, curtailment of private placement reverse solicitation, which I think is very much possible to happen, and the SFDR requirements. If you go into continental Europe now, you will have to be SFDR compliant, even via private placement. So we are consulting, we'll be putting a questionnaire to managers, and we're consulting with our tracker subscribers on that. This is what the EU UK Fund Forum and think tank actually comprises. As Karina mentioned, it comprises a monthly e-forum for UK managers and the EU industry to address matters as they arise in a sort of shared way. We will be covering kind of stuff I've just been talking about now. We have a weekly now in the weekly as news items emerge, but also in a section starting in the tracker on changes to the EU-UK relationship, and that starts. The new tracker will be out the March tracker will be out probably later on this week. When something big happens, we'll be publishing briefing papers on that for our subscribers as well. For example, things like portfolio management delegation, private placement, etc. And we're going to offer participants in this entity the opportunity to circulate their own papers and views to other participants in the think tank. So that's a very fast ramble through. Hopefully I've left enough time for questions, Karina. So have we got some questions? Let me stop sharing screen and then let's see whether we've got some questions. Yes, we do have some questions, I see. So
we do indeed. Okay, Simon, so first question, what difference would it make to the fund industry if there is no agreement on equivalence?
That's a very good question. If you could answer that in over half an hour to an hour. I think most important difference would be if there isn't an agreement on equivalence, and I don't think there will be in the short term at least. It's going to sour relations in the way that they're already pretty sour. It's going to make them even more sour. You'd have to be specific. Now I'm clearing with Andrew Bailey's obviously very exercise at the moment. That could be huge in the euro clearing market if there isn't an agreement in that area. The fund industry, as wasn't covered by the agreement that got over the line just before Christmas between the EU and the UK, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, it would be helpful to have it. It's probably the simple, briefest answer in the few minutes we have. It depends on the areas where there is and isn't equivalence, but overall, it does change the atmosphere significantly.
Okay. So another question, Simon, what do you think the deteriorating relationship between the EU and the UK means for the development of the financial services sector in Northern Ireland?
It's probably absolutely huge, both on the upside and on the downside. This is massively important, I think, not just in financial services, but in many other areas too. I think my guess is Northern Ireland is a bit in no man's land in between the sort of the EU on the one side and let's call it GB on the other side. Being optimistic, it could be a fantastic opportunity for Northern Ireland. It really could be, because they could end up doing a lot of the work that's the Dublin fund industry in many respects is already at capacity. Some of that work could be going into the north, provided there's no regulatory reason why that shouldn't happen, and there really isn't, there shouldn't be. So that would be fantastic. It really could develop a collaborative model with Dublin and the rest of the Republic. And indeed, things like, I mentioned portfolio management several times, there's no reason why there couldn't be portfolio management and risk management centres in Northern Ireland, serving both funds in the Republic of Ireland and in the rest of the UK. It could be an amazing opportunity for the North. That's on the upside. On the downside, if things really get out of hand, I don't think they'll get that bad, but it could be very detrimental. I would certainly, if I was in Northern Ireland, be really focused on this right now. It's probably much more an opportunity than a threat, but it's got both elements to it.
Okay, so I'm just going to summarize this comment a little bit, Simon. So given everything you've been saying, shouldn't we just get on with our global ambitions? The UK are not going to be doing any favors for us, quite the opposite. So shouldn't we just have a UK / global fund forum?
Very good question. You've got to start. I mean, I think these are huge issues for now. I mean, I think we've got, I see our role, Karina, to bring these massive issues to the attention of people both in the continent of Europe and in Ireland and to us here in the UK. The opportunities are definitely in North America and the Asia Pacific region and Australia and India and the Gulf and goodness knows where else. And indeed in Switzerland, which is the second biggest alternative market in Europe, which is also outside the EU. But these are huge issues. I think this is an historical moment. Sorry to sound a bit cliched here. This could affect for the rest of our lives the way the business operates. And we're in a rather fractious situation. So I think we have easily enough on our plate here in Europe in the broader sense, to deal with right now. Maybe will the EU-UK Fund Forum will become a global fund forum in future years, and I'd love for that to happen. But I think we've got enough on the plate right here and right now.
Okay, so thinking of some of the smaller fund jurisdictions, do you think that they're going to experience an increase in business in domiciliation and management?
When you say smaller, and in the European context, we're talking about two centres that really dominate, obviously in Ireland and in Luxembourg. It's possible that Malta or another jurisdiction in the Mediterranean could come along and play a bigger part than it has done. And certainly Malta is a jurisdiction I know quite well. I haven't been to for a few years, but I've been there several times in the past. I think it'd be great if it would be great for competition if there were other jurisdictions in the EU. As for offshore, the reasons I've already given, I won't repeat now. At least with regard to the EU, that's more problematic. Whether I think offshore may have a great future in the rest of the world, but with regard to the EU, that may not be necessarily the case.
Okay. Okay, so another question, Simon, can the EU change delegation arrangements for funds investing in Europe and not for those investing in, say, the US or Asia?
That's a very interesting question because, of course, as everyone I'm sure on this call knows very well, you will have global portfolio management teams depends on the fund and what it's actually investing in, but certainly plenty of examples of that where you'll have teams in, say, New York and London and Hong Kong or Tokyo, wherever it may be. How you can separate that out, I don't know. Certainly it's been muted by the EU. It goes back actually to very shortly after the referendum where they started this proximity thing. They would like to take control of, by far the biggest amount of investing that goes on is in Europe. This is on behalf of European investors, and they want more control over that. And they don't have that now since we left the EU. Can they do that? For the practical reason, that person who was asked the question, it's much more difficult. It's easier to say you're going to do it than actually do it in practice. There are certain funds you could do it quite easily. You could simply move a portfolio management team from London to Paris or Frankfurt or Amsterdam or Milan or wherever it may be. No problem at all. Do they have the infrastructure to do it? That's probably the bigger question a lot of people ask. That's more problematic, at least in the short term. But I think they would like to do it.
Okay, so with 1 minute, just one final question. Is the increase in difficulty and cost of managing a Luxembourg or Irish fund from the UK a reason to use a Jersey, Guernsey or Cayman fund instead?
Yes, it is, if you're allowed the distribution. And the moment you are, and hopefully, I pray you will be for a long time to come, but that there is an element of uncertainty. The big question with all of that also is whether or not investors in, say, a pension fund in Germany or wherever it may be, has its own regulatory requirements only to invest in a fund that happens to be domiciled in the EU. That does happen. There's been various issues in the Dutch pension fund industry on that too, whether they can invest offshore, but absolutely, provided you don't get this horrible fortress Europe antagonism going on with, not just with the UK, but the rest of the world, then the answer is yes to that.
Okay. So Simon, we're out of time, and I think we should round up.
Oh, right. Okay. Do you want to go first, or shall I go first, or?
You go first.
All right. Well, okay. Well, in the seconds I've got, thank you very much for joining us. Will be announced if anyone's interested who's not a subscriber in joining this forum and think tank. We'll be announcing more on that in the tracker, which I said will be out in the next few days. It will focus very much upon the UK managers' needs, but it will also focus upon anyone managers from other parts of the EU want to join in. They're very welcome to as well. And of course, the fund industry in places like Ireland and Luxembourg as well. So we do think there's going to be an awful lot of stuff for us to cover. We kick off with this research project right now in March, and then we get into the actual meat of the thing next month in April. So hopefully some of you will be joining us for that, and hopefully see you then.
Okay, looking forward to seeing everyone in April and in the months ahead, and perhaps even in person in the late autumn. Thank you all for joining us, and goodbye.
Bye-bye, everybody.